He drove the same old truck to set every morning, coffee in one hand, script in the other. To everyone, he was disciplined, made human, calm, polite,
I used people from the congregations, non-actors, as actors. And
impossible to hate. For 50 years, Hollywood called him the gentleman of the screen. But at 90, that mask finally cracked, and what he said left even his closest friends speechless. He said 6 names, not enemies from tabloids, but legends he once called family. The brother who betrayed him, the teacher who humiliated him, the idol who taught him cruelty. Each name carried a story that Hollywood tried to bury, stories of power, pride, and silence paid for in loyalty. Stay until the end, because when you hear who they are, you will understand why one of cinema's quietest men finally broke 50 years of silence. And before we dive in, take a second to subscribe so you will not miss the truth behind the fame. Tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are watching this right now? Because somewhere, and no matter the hour, truth is finally louder than legend. The first one, Al Pacino. When brotherhood turned to war, few Hollywood friendships burned brighter than Robert Duvall and Al Pacino's back in the 1970s. They shared a small apartment in Beverly Glen, 2 bedrooms, cracked walls, and a single stove that barely worked. At night, they rehearsed lines from The Godfather, passing a can of noodles between them like communion. They called each other brothers, not on screen, in real life. Back then, Duvall was calm, precise, almost military, pressed shirts, early calls, the kind of man who ironed his jeans and called it discipline. Pacino was fire, a storm trapped in a body too small for his ambition. He lived on coffee, cigarettes, and adrenaline. Together they were balance. One silence, one flame. When The Godfather exploded into history, the world saw 2 different faces of the same miracle. Pacino, the intensity of youth; Duvall, the quiet moral center. They walked the same red carpets, laughed at the same cheap jokes, shared cabs when the champagne ran out. Reporters called them the twin pillars of method acting. Directors whispered that the chemistry between them was lightning caught in a bottle. They promised each other that no matter how big the world got, they would stay brothers. For almost 20 years, that promise held. Then came The Godfather Part 3. It was 1990. Hollywood had changed. The business was bigger, the money heavier, the loyalty thinner. Paramount sent out the contracts, and friendship met the accountant's pen. Pacino was offered $5 million and 5% of the profits. Duvall got $1 million flat. No back end, no equity, no respect. The message was clear. One man mattered more. Duvall did not argue. He did not shout. He folded the papers, looked around the room one last time, and walked away. A few hours later, a fax came through on Francis Ford Coppola's desk. 6 words in black ink: "I will not return just to be someone's backdrop." That single line ended 2 decades of brotherhood. The studio panicked. Phones rang from Los Angeles to New York. They offered $2 million, then 3. They promised better billing, bigger bonuses. Duvall refused them all. Pacino stayed silent. He never picked up the phone. When a reporter asked later, Duvall said quietly, "You cannot preach family on screen and forget it off screen." That sentence landed like a hammer. Everyone who worked on those films knew what he meant. When The Godfather Part 3 premiered, critics felt the gap immediately. When Duvall left, wrote the Chicago Tribune, The Godfather lost its moral compass. Fans felt it too. Tom Hagen's calm strength, his steady eyes, were gone. The story felt colder, like a church without its choir. Pacino's performance burned bright, but the heart of the saga was missing. After walking away, Duvall drove back to his farm in Virginia. 900 acres of quiet. He traded the noise of premieres for the sound of wind in the grass. He rode horses at sunrise and fixed fences at dusk. He said he wanted to chase roles that felt honest. Hollywood called it exile. Pacino, meanwhile, became the face of chaos. Scarface, Heat, Scent of a Woman. His career caught fire. Duvall's turned to smoke in silence. Two paths from the same flame, splitting forever. Years passed. Studios forgot. Fans moved on. But Duvall never forgot the number. 5 million against one. He said it once to a friend while pouring coffee. That was the price of loyalty in Hollywood. The friend laughed, but Duvall did not. At the 2011 Oscars reunion, the cast of The Godfather stood together once more. Pacino and Duvall were only a few feet apart, faces blank, eyes fixed on anything but each other. Flashbulbs lit the stage like a battlefield. The crowd cheered for nostalgia. But between them hung 20 years of silence, heavy enough to drown the applause. Hollywood loves stories about loyalty. It builds them, sells them, then it breaks them. Robert Duvall learned that truth the hard way. In this town, family ends where the contract begins. Brotherhood is not written in blood. It is written in ink. And when the ink dries, someone always walks away. 5 million against one. That was the cost of brotherhood in Hollywood. The second one, Francis Ford Coppola, the teacher who became a stranger. In 1971, Robert Duvall was still a stage actor with more hope than fame. Then Francis Ford Coppola saw him across a casting room and said, "He is the Tom Hagen I have been looking for." That one line changed Duvall's life. From that moment, Coppola was not just a director. He was a mentor, a teacher, the man who showed Duvall how movies could live forever. They built The Godfather together, side by side, chasing perfection through sleepless nights and cold pizza. Coppola trusted him like a brother. He let Duvall rewrite lines, shape moments, and find silence inside chaos. When the movie premiered in 1972, both men rose together, one with vision, the other with presence. To Duvall, Coppola was proof that genius could also be kind. Then came Apocalypse Now. It was 1976. The jungle was real, the heat was deadly, and everyone on set was losing their mind. Duvall fainted from dehydration during the napalm scene. His lips cracked, his voice broke. But Coppola said calmly, "Do it again. The light is not right." Duvall got up, threw up blood, and finished the take. That scene made him immortal, but his trust in Coppola never recovered. He began to see his teacher as another Brando, brilliant but cruel. A decade later, history repeated itself. Coppola called about The Godfather Part 3. He wanted to reunite the family, to bring Tom Hagen home. But the contract came first. Pacino, $5 million plus 5% of the profits. Duvall, 1 million flat. The number spoke louder than friendship. He told the studio, "I will not act in a movie about family if that family does not respect each other." It was not anger. It was disappointment measured in silence. Coppola tried to fix it. He sent letters, wrote apologies, asked for a meeting. Duvall never replied. He told a friend, "Some silences mean more than words." For him, the bond that built The Godfather was already gone. When Part 3 premiered in 1990, critics noticed what was missing. The family still had power, but it no longer had conscience. Even Coppola later said, "I wish I had paid him whatever he wanted." But by then it was too late. The bridge had burned quietly, with no smoke left to see. Years later, when Coppola received a Lifetime Award, Duvall stayed home. He said softly, "Every great teacher eventually becomes a stranger." He meant Coppola, the man who gave him art and took away trust. What began as admiration ended as distance. The friendship that once shaped cinema became another Hollywood ghost. Duvall went back to his own rhythm. He wrote, directed, and searched for honesty in small films far from studio lights. He told one interviewer, "I learned to work with people who listen, not people who command." Coppola went on to be called a visionary. Duvall went on to be called a legend. But between them lay the quiet scar of respect turned to regret. Hollywood remembers the films, not the fractures. It celebrates the art, not the wounds behind it. But for Robert Duvall, Francis Ford Coppola would forever be the teacher who showed him how to fly, then let him fall. 5 million against one. That was the final lesson. And it cost them both their idea of family. The third one, Marlon Brando, the idol who became the enemy. In 1971, Robert Duvall walked onto the set of The Godfather believing he was about to meet a god. For years, he had studied Marlon Brando's work. On the waterfront, a streetcar named Desire, the wild one, he knew every pause, every breath, every flick of Brando's eyes. To Duvall, Brando was the mountain every real actor wanted to climb. When he heard that Brando would play Don Corleone, he said to a friend, "It will be like acting beside the sun." Then the sun arrived 2 hours late. Brando stepped out of his car wearing dark glasses, a cigarette between his lips, 3 assistants trailing behind. He refused rehearsals, changed lines without warning, and demanded cue cards taped to walls and even to other actors' backs. Everyone around him called it genius. Duvall saw chaos pretending to be art. He admired the result but hated the process. Brando was the soul of the movie, he later said, and the enemy of every actor inside it. During filming, Brando tested everyone's patience. He would disappear for hours, come back with new dialogue, and expect others to adjust. Pacino went along. Coppola defended him. Duvall stayed quiet but took notes in a small black notebook he kept in his pocket. He wrote one line, "Discipline makes art, not drama." It was his quiet rebellion against Brando's storm. When Paramount announced bonuses, the illusion finally cracked. Brando received an extra $50,000 for his performance. No one else did. Duvall stood up from the press room and walked out without a word. The next day he told a friend, "That is not art. That is ego getting paid." Then came 1973. Brando won the Oscar for Best Actor and refused to accept it. He sent an activist to the ceremony to decline the award live on television, turning the night into political theater. Half of America applauded. The other half gasped. Duvall just sat there watching the broadcast in silence. He told a friend later, "He turned our work into a protest." To Duvall, that night was not about courage or politics. It was betrayal. The Oscar was not just a trophy, it was a symbol of their craft, and Brando had thrown it away. From that moment, admiration turned into contempt. Duvall began to avoid any project connected to Brando's circle. He told an interviewer years later, "I used to think he changed acting. Now I think he destroyed it." He meant the endless improvisation, the disregard for structure, the belief that chaos could replace craft. To Duvall, Brando's gift had become poison for a generation of actors who thought wildness meant truth. When Brando's health began to fail in the 2000s, reporters asked Duvall if he would visit. He said no. He wished him peace but did not attend the funeral. Instead, he mailed Coppola a plain white card with 3 words written in pencil. "Let it end." That was all. No signature, no address, just finality. Hollywood called it cold. Duvall called it honest. He told a journalist, "Sometimes you have to bury a legend to keep your respect alive." He believed Brando was proof that even genius could rot if it stopped respecting the work. To him, Brando was both teacher and warning, a man who could create beauty while destroying everything around him. People often asked Duvall if he still admired Brando's films. He would nod and say, "Of course, the art remains." But then he would pause and add, "The man does not." That pause said more than any insult could. By the time Brando died in 2004, Duvall had already made peace with the memory. Not forgiveness, just closure. He said, "He was the reason I learned to love acting and the reason I stopped worshiping anyone." For Duvall, that was the real legacy. Not the awards, not the fame, but the realization that idols are only human, and sometimes the brightest light burns the closest hearts. Hollywood never forgot Marlon Brando's genius. Robert Duvall never forgot his shadow. The man who once inspired him had become a mirror reflecting everything he refused to become. And when people asked why he stayed silent all those years, Duvall would smile faintly and say, "Because some lessons are too expensive to repeat." 6 words, 1 lifetime. Let it end. The fourth one, Stanley Kubrick, the genius without a heart. Robert Duvall never liked talking about directors, but when the name Stanley Kubrick came up, his tone changed. He leaned back, looked down, and said softly, "The great Stanley Kubrick was an actor's enemy." The room went silent. It was 2010, a Hollywood Reporter roundtable with Ryan Gosling, Jeff Bridges, and George Clooney. Everyone thought Duvall was joking. He was not. His dislike of Kubrick did not come from jealousy. It came from belief. To Duvall, acting was about truth, breath, the human pulse behind every line. Kubrick, he said, replace that with machinery, precision without empathy, genius without soul. He had never worked directly with Kubrick, but he had watched him destroy actors he admired. The first time was in 1979, when he saw footage from The Shining. Shelley Duvall, no relation to him, was filmed swinging a baseball bat again and again, 127 takes. Her hands bled, her voice cracked. Kubrick stood behind the camera shouting, "Do it again!" Duvall watched that documentary years later and whispered, "That was not direction. That was torture." He believed Kubrick treated actors like furniture, moving them for light, not life. In an interview, he asked, "How can a man tell the difference between take 1 and take 70? He said Kubrick did not direct actors. He drained them. It was not personal. It was philosophical. Duvall believed every great performance came from freedom, from trust. Kubrick's world, he said, was made of fear. Years earlier, Kubrick had reached out to Duvall about a film called The Aryan Papers. It was supposed to be his next masterpiece, a dark story about war and guilt. They met in a small office in London. Duvall said the room felt colder than a morgue. Kubrick spoke for 30 minutes straight about lighting, lens distance, camera rhythm. Not once did he mention emotion, or character, or heart. When the meeting ended, Duvall shook his hand and walked out into the fog. He never returned his calls. Later, he told a friend, the air in that room had no oxygen. To Hollywood, Kubrick was a visionary. To Duvall, he was proof that obsession could kill empathy. He respected the craft but rejected the method. He said, "Perfection is not truth, it is fear in disguise." That quote spread quickly through the industry, turning admiration into controversy. People whispered that Duvall had finally gone too far, but he did not care. He had seen too many actors break chasing someone else's perfection. After that roundtable in 2010, journalists kept asking him about Kubrick. He always gave the same answer. He was a genius. Yes, but a genius without a heart. Every time he said it, the phrase felt heavier, like he was talking about something larger than one man. He was talking about Hollywood itself, the system that worshiped precision over passion, that built legends out of cruelty and called it art. Years later, a student asked him if he ever regretted saying those words. Duvall smiled faintly and said, "No, I meant every one of them." He paused, then added, "I would rather make one honest mistake than 100 perfect takes." He never worked with Kubrick. He never wanted to. To him, The Shining, 2001, Full Metal Jacket. They were monuments of control, not of humanity. Beautiful, brilliant, but frozen. He admired them as a viewer, not as an actor. He said those films looked like marble statues, flawless, and dead. When asked what he thought Kubrick left behind, Duvall said, "A mirror, one that shows what happens when art forgets compassion." He did not hate Kubrick. He pitied him. Because for all the light he captured, he never understood warmth. Hollywood called Stanley Kubrick a visionary. Robert Duvall called him a warning. And when people reminded him of the backlash, he would shrug and say, "I spent my life chasing truth, not approval." That was why he never changed his mind. In a world obsessed with perfection, Robert Duvall chose heart. Kubrick chose control. Two masters, two paths, one truth. Genius means nothing if it forgets to feel. The fifth one, Robert De Niro. The Cold War between two methods. Robert Duvall never shouted at Robert De Niro. He never argued, never slammed a door. Their war was silent. It started with respect and ended with distance. Both men were icons of serious acting, the kind of actors Hollywood called pure, but purity can take two shapes. For Duvall, it was stillness. For De Niro, it was transformation. And that difference turned into a quiet rivalry that lasted decades. They first crossed paths after The Godfather Part 2. De Niro had played the young Vito Corleone, the role that made him a star. Duvall had already become the soul of the Corleone family, the man who gave reason to chaos. Critics called them the two faces of American method acting. But behind the praise, Duvall felt a tension. He saw in De Niro something he could not accept, the idea that acting had to be painful to be real. De Niro shaved his head for Taxi Driver, gained 60 pounds for Raging Bull, and lived like a gangster for months before filming Goodfellas. He called it dedication. Duvall called it theater for the body, not for the soul. He once told a friend, "The work is not in the weight gain, it is in the silence." That line was his way of saying that truth does not need disguise. To him, De Niro was turning performance into a circus of transformation, where effort became a show and emotion got lost behind costumes. Hollywood loved De Niro's extremes. Every new role made headlines. Every transformation was treated like magic. But Duvall saw vanity. He said once, "He is good at playing Italians." Very good. It sounded like praise, but it was not. It was Duvall's polite knife, a reminder that imitation is not identity. For Duvall, the best acting was invisible. For De Niro, it was total surrender. They were two masters standing on opposite sides of the same mirror. The tension grew quietly over the years. They would see each other at awards shows, shake hands, smile for the cameras, but the warmth was gone. Behind every polite nod was a small storm of disapproval. Duvall once said in an interview, "Obsession can masquerade as depth." Everyone knew who he was talking about. De Niro never fired back. He said only, "Bob's a serious actor. We just have different energies." That was the public version. Privately, they avoided each other for decades. In the 2000s, when De Niro began acting in comedies like Meet the Parents and Analyze This, Duvall saw it as proof that the mask had cracked. He told a friend, "There it is. The disguise finally fell." He did not mean it cruelly. He meant that every actor eventually meets the limit of their own method. Duvall's limit was silence. De Niro's was transformation. Both paid the price. People often ask Duvall why he never worked with De Niro again. He would shrug and say, "One of us chases applause, the other chases truth." That was all he ever said. No anger, no insult, just distance. It was not personal anymore. It was philosophical. Two schools of belief that could never exist in the same scene. By the time they reached their 70s, the rivalry had turned into quiet respect. At one tribute event, De Niro spoke kindly of Duvall, calling him one of the last real ones. Duvall smiled but said nothing. Later, he told a reporter, "He is a craftsman, not a poet." That was the closest thing to a compliment he ever gave. Robert De Niro became the face of transformation. Robert Duvall became the voice of restraint. One burned for intensity, the other for truth. They defined two ends of the same art. But when Duvall was asked in an interview to name the actor who best represented his opposite, he smiled and said, "De Niro, of course." He taught the world that you can change everything about yourself and still miss what matters. Hollywood celebrates both men. It calls them legends, symbols, heroes of craft. But behind the lights was a quiet Cold War, fought not with words, but with beliefs. For Duvall, acting was faith. For De Niro, it was transformation. And somewhere between those two truths lies the soul of every actor who ever stepped into the spotlight. The sixth one, Bruce Beresford, the Oscar that left a scar. Robert Duvall won his first and only Oscar working with Bruce Beresford, and he hated every moment that led to it. The year was 1983. The film was Tender Mercies, a quiet story about a washed-up country singer trying to rebuild his life. It should have been a redemption tale for both actor and character. Instead, it became one of the most bitter experiences of Duvall's career. They met in Texas, far from Hollywood's noise. The budget was small, the crew tight, and the expectations modest. Beresford was a perfectionist from Australia, a man who believed the camera should rule the actor. Duvall believed the opposite. He thought truth came from instinct, not orders. The first clash came on the second day of shooting. Beresford stopped the scene and told Duvall, "Slower, like a man thinking." Duvall replied, "A drunk man never speaks slowly." The set went silent. That sentence marked the beginning of a war disguised as collaboration. For weeks, they fought quietly through the camera. Beresford wanted more takes, cleaner timing, perfect light. Duvall wanted fewer takes, messy truth, human flaws. Some scenes dragged on for hours. Duvall said later, "I could feel the soul draining out of the story." At dawn one morning, before anyone else arrived, he filmed a small moment by himself, his character singing in a church, voice cracking, eyes half closed. No crew, no director, just a sound man and sunrise light. That stolen take became the emotional center of the entire film. When Tender Mercies opened, critics called it quiet magic. They praised the stillness, the restraint, the honesty. They said Duvall had never been better, but behind the praise was a secret war nobody saw. The performance people called Barry was born from rebellion. Duvall never mentioned it, but the tension leaked through in interviews. He would say, "Sometimes you have to choose loyalty to the character or to someone else." Everyone in the industry knew what he meant. Then came Oscar night. Tender Mercies was nominated for Best Actor, Best Director, and Best Screenplay. Duvall won. He walked to the stage, calm as stone, holding the gold statue like it weighed nothing. He thanked the writer. He thanked the crew. He thanked his horse back in Virginia. But he never mentioned Bruce Beresford. Not once. So the silence was louder than any insult. The next morning, the Hollywood Reporter ran the headline, "Duvall ignores Beresford at the Oscars." Beresford tried to downplay it. He told the Sydney Morning Herald, "I respect him, but we can never work together again." That was the truth. After the ceremony, people asked Duvall why he had done it. He said, "Because honesty deserves gratitude. Control does not." He never apologized. To him, the Oscar was proof that the performance mattered more than the director who tried to shape it. He said, "Winning that award felt like walking away from a cage." Years later, when asked about Tender Mercies, Duvall called it both a blessing and a scar. He said the film taught him two lessons. First, that silence can win the loudest battles. Second, that some victories cost more than they give. He still admired Beresford's skill, but never forgave his style. He told one interviewer, he was a good director, but he treated emotion like a piece of furniture. That line summed up everything. After that, Duvall began directing his own films, The Apostle, Assassination Tango, and other projects he controlled from start to finish. He said he needed to protect the space where truth lives. He wanted no more middlemen, no more orders shouted across the set. He became the kind of director he had once wished for, quiet, patient, respectful of actors' instincts. Bruce Beresford continued his career with other films, always professional, always distant. He once said Duvall was brilliant, but he never trusted anyone. Maybe both were right. One chased control, the other chased freedom. And somewhere between them lay the cost of creation. Tender Mercies remains one of the most honest films ever made. But behind every gentle note of that country song was a bruise. The performance that earned an Oscar was born from defiance, not harmony. And when Duvall looks at that golden statue today, he probably still hears the echo of that morning in Texas, when he sang Alone to the Rising Sun. The Oscar shines, but the scar never fades. Robert Duvall's story is not just about fame or betrayal. It is a mirror, a long reflection of what it costs to hold on to truth in a world built on illusion. 6 enemies, 6 chapters of pride, silence, and survival. But behind every fracture, behind every goodbye, there was one simple belief that honesty matters more than applause. Duvall's life reminds us that greatness does not come from being loved by everyone. It comes from being loyal to yourself when the world asks you to bend. He lost friendships that defined an era. He walked away from contracts worth millions. He said no when saying yes would have made him rich, famous, comfortable. And yet, decades later, his name still stands for integrity. Because in Hollywood, where the lights never stop shining, he chose to live in the dark if that meant being real. Every story we heard tonight carries a lesson that reaches far beyond film. With Al Pacino, it was about respect and how loyalty breaks when money starts talking louder than brotherhood. With Francis Ford Coppola, it was about trust and how even a teacher can forget his own lessons. With Marlon Brando, it was about ego and how genius can destroy itself when it forgets humility. With Stanley Kubrick, it was about compassion, that perfection without heart is nothing but cruelty in disguise. With Robert De Niro, it was about philosophy and how art can split between obsession and truth. And with Bruce Beresford, it was about freedom and how the price of control can turn victory into regret. Each of these stories shows something about life, not just acting. We have all had our Pacinos, our Brandos, our Coppolas, people we admired, trusted, and lost. We have all had to choose between peace and pride, between silence and survival. Robert Duvall's journey is a reminder that walking away does not always mean failure. Sometimes it is the only way to stay human. He once said, "I do not hate anyone, I just remember everything." That sentence holds the weight of a lifetime, because forgiveness is not forgetting. It is learning to live with the truth of what happened and still moving forward. In the end, maybe that is what we are all doing, trying to protect the little part of ourselves that refuses to sell out, trying to keep one piece of honesty in a world that keeps asking for more. Robert Duvall's enemies were not villains. They were teachers. Each one showed him who he did not want to become. And maybe that is the most powerful lesson of all, that knowing who you are not is the first step to knowing who you are. So if you are watching this right now, think about your own story. Think about the people who shaped you, helped you, hurt you. Think about what you are willing to lose to stay true to yourself. Would you walk away like Duvall did? Would you choose silence over compromise? The answers may surprise you. Life, just like art, is not about how loud you speak. It is about how honest your silence is. And in that silence, Robert Duvall found peace, something money could never buy and fame could never fake. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and stay with us for more untold truths behind the names you thought you knew. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are watching this right now? Because wherever you are, whether it is midnight or morning, stories like these remind us that it is never too late to choose honesty over everything else. Everything else. Everything else. Everything else.